Welcome! In this online training, you will learn about SAS EVAAS and how it supports the teacher incentive allotment. Let's get started. In the classroom, learning works both ways. The more teachers learn about their students, the better they can help them grow academically. But to better understand their students, educators need meaningful data on how they are meeting students' needs. SAS EVAAS can provide teachers with insights on how they're helping students to progress academically. But what is EVAAS? Where did it come from? And how is it used in Texas? In this video, we will begin with the history of EVAAS, then address how we measure growth, and finally, outline the role EVAAS data plays to support the Texas Teacher Incentive Allotment, or TIA. Let's begin with a brief history of EVAAS. EVAAS stands for Education Visualization and Analytics Solution. It was founded by Dr. William Sanders at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and was fully implemented statewide in Tennessee by 1996. This team's research established many of today's basic understandings about measuring teaching effectiveness. Their work made it clear that teaching matters. Ineffective teaching cannot be easily compensated for in future years, and all students can make progress and grow despite their backgrounds. Moving from the university to SAS enabled the EVAAS team to expand its work to many other states, which are pictured here. EVAAS is the most comprehensive secure growth reporting system, and it supports over 500,000 active users. So, how does EVAAS work? First, instruction takes place. Next, students take STAR assessments, and the Texas Education Agency sends their standardized test scores and other student-level and group-level characteristics to EVAAS. Then, EVAAS performs sophisticated statistical analyses of the data, focusing on the relationships among scores, to determine how much academic growth students made. Finally, the results are aggregated for use in the TIA data validation process. EVAAS provides value-added modeling, or VAM, so let's outline what that means. It's important to note that value-added analysis is not specific to education. In fact, value-added is an economic term that has been applied in other fields. Value added essentially means that the result of a set of inputs that are processed in some way is more valuable than the initial inputs themselves were before processing. Let's think through some real-world examples of value added in various contexts to make this clearer. A real-world example of value added can be found in the healthcare field. Patients benefit when nurses are highly effective because they are less likely to have adverse outcomes or be readmitted to the hospital after release. Hospitals also benefit when nurses are highly effective because of lower costs of care. Statistical analyses have shown that some nurses are more effective than others, and their patients benefit from more positive long-term outcomes. As a result, there are efforts being made to invest in supporting nurses to adopt strategies found to be highly effective and to provide rewards that can help retain nurses that are found to be highly effective through value-added analyses. Now, let's consider an economic example. A company creates a low-price product that initially does not sell very well. The company hires a marketing team to promote the product and demand explodes. Suddenly, customers can't get enough. Stores and online retailers are unable to keep it stocked because they quickly run out as soon as more become available. Though it is very inexpensive to create this product, the company can begin charging much more than they initially did because of skyrocketing demand. They raise the price significantly, which gives them a very large profit margin. The marketing company added value to the final product, making it a great example of value added in action in everyday life. In educational contexts, value-added data can measure teachers' contributions to student growth outcomes. In Texas, EVAAS uses student data from STAR assessments to help identify teachers that are highly effective. meaning that many of their students meet or exceed expected growth. When considering student growth outcomes, it's important to make the distinction between growth and achievement. What do we mean by growth, and how does it differ from achievement? An exciting and critical thing to keep in mind is that teachers can help all students make progress, no matter what their proficiency levels may be. The key to understanding EVAAS analysis is its focus on student growth. Not every child starts or ends the school year at targeted proficiency levels, but every student can grow academically. Achievement provides a snapshot of a single point in time and is often defined by the score the student received on test day under a specific set of conditions. Growth, on the other hand, refers to continuous improvement over time. When analyzing growth, we consider how students were expected to perform and whether or not a teacher's students tended to fall short of or exceed that expectation, regardless of their achievement levels. Many traditional systems of evaluating academic success focus on achievement, which is only one part of the picture. Here's a group of high school math students. If we look at their achievement, things look pretty good. At the end of the school year, they more than met the standard for proficiency. But what if we look at how they were expected to perform? Then the picture becomes quite different. This group of students did not perform as well as we would expect them to, given an average year of learning. They lost ground. They're still scoring above the proficient range, but considering growth alongside achievement tells a different story than if we just looked at achievement alone. Now let's look at a group of students with lower achievement. At the end of the year, none of them passed the math assessment. But if we look at how they were expected to perform academically, they exceeded expectations. These students had an incredible year of learning and gained ground. Looking at growth, EVAAS acknowledges that academically, students don't all start the year at the same place. So not all students can become high-achieving or even proficient by the end of the year. But regardless of their achievement levels, all students can make significant gains in learning. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at how EVAAS measures academic growth in Texas, using the predictive model. This model uses students' assessment results from the past to determine how they would be expected to perform on a current assessment given an average learning experience, and then compares that to their actual performance. It helps us see if students maintained their achievement, gained ground, or lost ground. We can use students' entire testing histories, that is, their prior performances on standardized assessments, to predict how they're likely to do on any given STAR assessment. Additionally, the model considers several student-level and group-level characteristics, in addition to students' prior assessment histories. Before taking a closer look at education scenarios, let's consider a similar situation outside of education that can serve as a parallel example of how EVAAS uses students' testing histories to determine their expected scores. Let's say we want to determine how a runner will perform in a 400-meter race. The runner has never run the 400-meter before, so how can we get an idea of what their time will be? Well, the runner has run the 100-meter dash before, the 200-meter, and the 800-meter. So we can take all their times from those races and use them to get a good idea of how they'll likely perform in the 400-meter. In addition, we have data on other runners. We can look at the relationships between how runners performed in the past in the 100, 200, and 800-meter competitions. Then we can look at how those runners have actually performed in the 400-meter. That gives us even more data about how our runner might do. How does that translate to students' expected scores on STAR assessments? Just as we know our runners' previous times in other races, we know how our students performed on previous assessments, their testing histories. And just as we know how runners actually performed in the 400-meter, we also know how students statewide actually scored on that same STAR assessment. These two factors, Previous testing history and students' actual scores statewide give us a reasonable expectation for how our students would have been expected to perform on this STAR assessment. The model also takes into account any additional information that can be gained by considering students' census tier, the average school census tier, school rurality status, and the average prior achievement among a teacher's students. Of course, expected scores aren't set in stone. What happens in the classroom can greatly impact students' performances. With the right support, students at any level of achievement can grow and perform better than expected. And that's the goal of EVAAS reporting, to inform every district, school, and teacher of how their students are progressing so they can help students stay on the path to future success. Now, keep that in mind, and let's consider some technical details. A student's entering achievement informs their expected score for the selected assessment. An expected score is simply what we would reasonably expect a student to score if they made typical progress given an average learning experience. Remember that the expected score is generated by looking at each individual student's testing history. It's important to note that students must have at least 3 prior test scores for EVAAS to determine their expected scores. An exception to this is 4th grade students, who need 2 prior test scores for an expected score to be calculated. Students' expected scores are then compared to their actual scores, and this serves as the basis for determining if each student met expected growth. The model involves more complexity than we're able to cover in this short video, but the basics we cover here should give you a good start for understanding how academic growth is calculated in EVAAS. Now, let's consider some student-specific examples. This is Whitney. Let's consider how her growth is calculated on the Algebra 1 STAR assessment. To determine her expected score, EVAAS considers Whitney's testing history, along with the testing histories of all other students in Texas who took the Algebra 1 assessment in the same year along with the other student and group level characteristics. Using the relationships and patterns in that data, EVAAS is able to determine that her expected scale score on the Algebra 1 exam is 4766. It turns out that Whitney grew exactly as expected, and her actual scale score when she took the test was 4766. The difference between her expected and actual scores is 0, meaning Whitney met expected growth. Now, let's consider Ethan. Just as we did with Whitney, we can determine Ethan's expected score by considering his testing history, along with the testing histories of all students in Texas who took the same Algebra 1 assessment in the same year, along with the additional student level and group level characteristics. His expected scale score is 3,900. It turns out that Ethan has an exceptional learning experience, and his actual score is 4053. This positive difference of 153 shows that Ethan exceeded his expected score, thereby gaining ground and exceeding expected growth. It's important to note that teachers must have at least 5 full-time equivalent, or FTE students, to be included in this process for a given assessment. This is based on the number of students linked to the teacher and whether these students are also linked to another teacher in a course associated with the same assessment. For example, if a teacher taught 20 students for half of their instructional time, because those students were also assigned to another teacher in a course associated with the same assessment, then the teacher's FTE number of students would be 10, and they would meet the minimum for receiving a teacher growth measure. If, however, there were 6 such students, they would have 3 FTE students, and they would not meet the minimum for receiving a teacher growth measure. Next, let's consider how the results can be used to provide the percentage of a teacher's students meeting or exceeding expectations. This teacher instructs 83 students in Algebra 1 across 3 different classes. 59 of those students met or exceeded their expected scores. To calculate this teacher's percentage of students meeting or exceeding expectations, we would divide the number of students whose actual scores met or exceeded their expected scores, which in this case is 59, by the total number of student scores, which is 83. Next, we can multiply the result by 100 to get the final percentage. In our example, this calculation results in 71% of students meeting or exceeding expectations. Let's consider one more example. This teacher provides math, reading, science, and social studies instruction to 24 students in 8th grade. When his students take the STAR assessments, they each take one test for each subject. That is 4 tests per student, resulting in a total of 96 tests. Of these results, 55 meet or exceed expected scores. So we can find this teacher's percentage meeting or exceeding expectations by dividing 55 by 96, and then multiply that answer by 100. The result is 57% of students meeting or exceeding expectations. You may be wondering, what does EVAAS have to do with TIA? EVAAS growth data supports the development of performance standards and supports data validation checks when districts apply for system approval. Analyzing growth data is one of many ways to measure teacher effectiveness. So EVAAS growth data or other growth measures represent one component of local designation systems used in TIA. Districts can also use teacher observations and other locally available data to support local designation systems and measure teacher effectiveness. One way that EVAAS data is used to support TIA is in the development of student growth performance standards. SAS calculates statewide value-added results for STAR assessments and reviews the distribution of these results on an ongoing basis with TEA and Texas Tech. This review results in the development of the Student Growth Performance Standards, which can support districts as they develop and review results from their local designation systems. The current standards displayed here represent the percentage of students meeting or exceeding expectations for teachers across the state using EVAAS value-added results. Teachers with each designation category will generally meet or exceed these thresholds, but there could be exceptions in a district submission based on the review of all data available for a given teacher. There are 2 steps in the district approval process for TIA. The first step is application approval, which is qualitative. In this step, districts submit applications, which could include narrative components, to TEA. The second step is system approval, which is quantitative. In this step, districts submit evidence of teacher effectiveness data to Texas Tech University. TEA reviews the results from Step 1 and Step 2 to determine final approval. The data validation checks used to support system approval decisions utilize data submitted by districts, and some checks also use EVAAS value-added data. For the purposes of the data validation checks that use EVAAS value-added data, teachers are categorized using the cut points associated with the Student Growth Performance Standards. The checks that incorporate this data consider the extent to which the proportions of teachers districts submit for each designation align with the proportions implied by the Student Growth Performance Standards and EVAAS value-added results, and the extent to which districts submitted teacher-level designations align with designations implied by the Student Growth Performance Standards and EVAAS value-added results. Note that for the purposes of applicable data validation checks, perfect alignment in the data submitted by districts is not required to pass data validation, and if system approval is granted, the designations submitted by the district are assigned to teachers in approved local designation systems. Additionally, beginning with the 2023-24 analysis, EVAAS is partnering with TEA and Texas Tech to provide districts with access to their teachers' percentage of students meeting or exceeding expectations. Districts are encouraged to use the data to inform validity and reliability of their local designation system, including checking the alignment between locally calculated student growth measures and the Texas statewide value-added growth data. Districts should consider engaging teachers around whether to include statewide value-added data in their local designation system by expanding or modifying their system in April of each year. In conclusion, EVAAS partners with Texas to provide student growth data that represents one measure of teacher effectiveness. This data is used to support the development of performance standards and data validation checks for the teacher incentive allotment. More detailed information can be found on the resources page of the Texas Teacher Incentive Allotment website. The link on your screen will take you directly to the statistical models and business rules document. We hope this video has been a helpful guide in outlining how EVAAS measures student growth and how this data informs the TIA process. Thank you for watching.